All right. Hello, everyone. It's so great to. Oh, hello. You'll have to forgive me. Um, I am trying to figure out. Hang on. There you go. Stop video. Um, okay. We're just inviting people in at the moment. Okay. Perfect. So I'm obviously going to be distracted whilst people are still arriving. I think a really good way to start this is first of all to say, welcome everybody. This is our first session of the workshop in the studio. It's great to have you here. It's lovely that we can do this and offer you support through various different themes and topics. And the one we're sort of exploring today is with the wonderful Liz Mosley, who is a graphic designer, specialist in branding. And she has her own wonderful podcast, which you're going to tell us all about. I mean, do you want to sort of introduce yourself? I mean, we all know you, but I'm sure there's a few, potentially a few who don't.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, so as Katie said, I'm a branding designer and I've got a podcast called Building Your Brand, which I recently interviewed Katie for, which is very exciting. So that'll be coming out, I think, next month. Which is all about branding and marketing, very much aimed at like creative and small business owners, helping them, yeah, with those things. I think the sort of premise behind it is that we're all wearing so many different hats in our business, and so just to try and like cover lots of different topics and help people work on different aspects of their businesses. And I also do like loads of other things. I'm definitely the sort of person where I like to have lots of different things going on. So I'm always like experimenting with things, doing other bits and pieces, um, doing like talks and public speaking and stuff like this, and getting rejected, which is my current obsession. So yeah, that's me.
Fabulous. Well, thank you very much. I'm just adding a few people. If you're just joining, you're late, for goodness sake. Honestly. Right. So we're going to talk about rejection. It's like something that we very much all suffer from. It's completely normal. It's human. We all go through it. It can be horrible. It can be soul destroying. And as creatives, though, it's kind of part of the deal, isn't it? We all have to go through it. And you went through it quite a lot recently. Well, it was a couple of years ago, wasn't it? Because you started a podcast, which is hugely successful. How many episodes have you done now?
I think I'm on 153. Someone's just put in the chat that they can't see me. I don't know why that
Oh,
is.
can they not? Okay, hang on a second. Um, can everybody see her now?
Yes. Okay,
Fabulous.
perfect. There we
Thank you.
go.
Sorry about that, guys. You have to bear with me. I'm very new to all this. And yeah, it will improve. Hopefully, be nice and smooth. I can't even read the messages. Right, I'm here now. Okay, where were we?
Yeah,
Okay,
podcast 150. I think it's like 153 around there.
153. Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Do you find that you generally get people to say yes when you invite them onto the show?
Yeah, definitely. I think most people are really keen to be on podcasts because it's such a good way to like PR yourself, like your business. It's like I think it's a really good way to do that because you basically get to borrow someone else's audience and you get to get yourself in front of new people. And I think it's a really nice, like it's quite a chilled way of sort of talking about what you do because, well, I don't know, it depends on the podcast, I guess, but mine's very, very like a very relaxed vibe. So I think, like it's a nice way for people to come on, talk about their sort of area of like specialism, and then they get to promote their business as well. So yeah, most people say yes. Um, yeah, I think there's only one person that said no. No, no, there must be more than that actually. No, there are more than that. But yeah, most people say yes.
Who could say no to you? And I've been on your podcast. I've listened to your podcast. You're great. You know, it's a really relaxed conversation that you have with people. But that might not be the thing that swings it for some people. Are you going to tell us who turned you down to come on your podcast?
Well, yeah. So I went to a conference in America and Christo was there, and I did that classic thing where I think I had bought his book and I shared a picture of it on Instagram and tagged him in it, and then he replied. I've since found out that it was actually a bot reply. But I thought it was him. And so I was like, oh my goodness, he's replied to me. So now if I reply to him, it'll probably end up in his like main inbox, like not in that hidden one where people you don't know send you messages. So I was like, oh, I'm just going to shoot my shot and ask him if he'd be up for being on the podcast. And this was like, I think this was like really late at night after like a long day at the conference. But I was like, what have I got to lose?
Yeah.
And basically he said no.
Damn. He didn't know
Yeah,
what he was missing out on.
I
Do you
know.
know why? Do you know why he
Yeah, I
decided?
do. Yeah, I mean, he was actually very sort of like clear and open about it. So basically, I asked him and then he asked me how many downloads I had per episode, and I told him. And I don't know what you feel about this, Katie, but I just can't cope with like exaggerating things. So I was like very honest about the number of downloads I had. I've since talked to people who were like, everyone else is just making that stuff up and just saying whatever sounds good. And I was like, oh, really? So I told him accurately what the number of downloads were. And he basically replied and said that he was looking for a much bigger audience. And
Fair enough.
his like, yeah, fair enough. His mission is he's got this like really clear mission. I think it's to help like a million creatives do what they like, or it might even be a billion. I don't know. It's some crazy large number where he wants to help that number of creatives like make money doing what they love. And so for him, getting in front of like big audiences is like really important so that he can like get closer to that goal. And so yeah, so he was basically like, it's sort of too low. And also, he must get asked to be on podcasts all the time. So he does have to
Mm.
be selective and have some sort of boundary as to like what he says yes to. But what was really nice about it is he replied and said, "Oh, when you get to this sort of number, like get back in touch." So it wasn't a forever no, but it was a definite no.
What was the number? Asking for a friend?
Okay, so the number was actually not that high. I think it was about 2,500 downloads per episode. Oh, you won't have
Oh,
any issues. But
wow. Okay.
but then I've spoken to him since and he said another number that was way higher and I was like, Flip, I'm never gonna get.
Wow. Okay. Well, with 5,000 on
Oh,
average.
you'll be fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Pop him a message.
Well, the thing is, I'm kind of reluctant to get big names on the show
Yeah.
because Creative Boom's got a different mission. I try and sort of
Hmm.
find different people that haven't really sort of been on the circuit, and that's not to say that that's not right for you. I know that when you get big names like that on your own show, that's a real massive boost
Mm.
to your show. I'm lucky because I've got this other thing over here, so I can sort of get away with sticking to our original mission, which is to support emerging and established names. So we try and give it a mix. I'd love to have Chris do on the show. It'd be really interesting to try and get a different perspective from him. I'd have to do a lot of research. And I'm sure as you do, you try and find something new that nobody else has covered.
Mm.
Okay, so how did you feel when he said no? What was the sort of like, afterthoughts, the sort of after crash?
Well, I was actually really surprised how I felt because it wasn't actually that big a deal, but I felt really embarrassed. I felt like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I did that. And now he said no. And and I think like almost like a little bit of shame, like, oh, who was I to ask such a big name to be on and at that point, like I was really it was quite early into the podcast. So it was like small and I was a bit like, oh, what was I thinking, like asking him. And I mean, I sort of like had those feelings and I got over it. But I do really clearly remember thinking, this doesn't feel good. I am not going to ask someone of his sort of like level of fame again. And then I was sort of moved on and didn't think about it very much. And then a few months later, I was like, thought back to how I'd thought, I'm not going to do this again. I think I was probably thinking about approaching someone else at the time. And I was like, oh my goodness, that like mindset and that way of thinking is actually stopping me from asking other people that I want to be on the podcast because I had this experience where it didn't feel good and now I don't want to feel that again. So I'm just like, shut it down. And I was like, oh, how many other areas of my business is this happening where I had almost
Mm.
like subconsciously and I hadn't even realized. And I'm just like, did this thing, didn't feel good, not doing it again. And I was like, oh, hang on a second. This is like holding me back. So what am I going to do about it?
Yeah, it's tragic, isn't it? When it happens, we just think, "Oh, I'm not good enough," and we kind of
Mm,
like put up these crazy expectations on ourselves, these measurements that don't really exist. Like we have to sort of, oh, as soon as that happens, then we'll be a success. We'll have made it. And but then what if that happens? What's next? You're just on this constant
yeah.
it's reframing things, isn't it? And realizing that actually for every episode that you do with whoever it is, you're gaining skills, you're meeting
Hmm.
new people. You know as well as I do, you make great connections when you do podcasts. And you put yourself out there, you're building something. So, if there's a big name that's not necessarily on there, it doesn't really matter. Keep going. One day they might do. Maybe you'll be so big that you'll be saying to them, yeah, sorry, mate.
I'm all right, thanks.
You've not got enough Instagram followers.
Can you
We're gonna.
imagine? Oh my God. The petty side of me would love to do.
It's the pretty woman scene, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, totally.
You used to want
Yeah.
4,000 downloads for your account.
Yeah,
Oh, now
yeah.
we get 1 million. Big mistake. Huge. I have to go podcasting now. Can you imagine?
Yeah. I love that you reenacted it for us.
Oh yeah, you've got to. We can laugh, but you did the brilliant thing, which most brilliant people do. You kind of thought, right, okay, I've been rejected. This is happening to me. I can either sort of go into this dark space or I can do something really productive and positive and flip it on its head and change the mind shift. And that's exactly what you did, didn't you?
Yeah, so I think once I'd acknowledged that actually maybe this was sort of harming my business and holding me back, then I was like, well, how can I flip this around? And I had a friend called Katie. Well, I make that sound like she's not my friend anymore. She's still my friend. I have a friend called Katie Chappell, who's an illustrator. I mean, we're like internet pals and
The
we've been following each.
northeastern girl.
Yeah.
Oh, she's
Yeah.
great.
She's so good. She does live illustration. And I remember that she'd written a couple of years ago, she had done, well, she had a much politer way of putting it. She put, I think she called it like about collecting no's. So she was like collecting no thank yous. So she, like very intentionally went out seeking no's so that she would like pitch herself for more things. And so I basically took that and ran with it a bit. And I was like, right, I'm going to set myself a rejection challenge. Like, I'm going to go out looking for rejection. Like, that is the goal. And so, yeah, I set myself a challenge to get 100 rejections in 6 months off. And it was off the back, like the Christo thing was what sparked it. And yeah, I mean, it was such an interesting experience. And at the beginning, when I was talking about, obviously, I was like, I'll share about it as I go. I didn't say who it was that had sparked what it was about because he obviously didn't know any of this. So I sort of did the challenge, didn't really say anything. But then eventually I told him. And so then at that point, I was like, oh, well, now I can tell everyone it was Krista who started this whole
Yeah.
thing. It's his fault.
Oh, well, I mean, it actually ended up doing you proud, didn't it? Because you did a little kind of chart, didn't you? Like we had in
I've
school.
recently, so well, no, I didn't at the time. I just did it with a like Google sheet, and I basically was like, right, I'm going to make a list of all the people that I want to pitch to, all the sort of opportunities, because I needed to make sure that I had at least 100. And then I was like, I'll just start working through them. And then I would document, like the date that I sent the pitch and if I'd followed up and whether they said yes or no, or maybe like sometimes it was a maybe. So I kept like a record of it all. And then this year, off the back of a chat that me and Katie had, because we were talking about how fun it would be to have a sticker chart like you would at school, and so I made a sticker chart. So that's my that's what I'm using this year to make it a bit more fun. Well, because I'm still doing the challenge, like, yes, well that kind of gives it away. But I failed getting 100 rejections in 6 months because 2 years on, I'm still doing
You're
it.
still doing it. That's brilliant. We used to get such joy, didn't we, out of those little gold stars?
I know. So satisfying. And I've got it like it's up on my wall and I just add smiley faces every time someone rejects me. So yeah, it's very satisfying.
It's great. I love it. And you kind of then go, all right, well, I'm not afraid to have rejection. I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to approach people I probably wouldn't have gone to before, and we're just going to see what happens. So, was there anything that happened recently where you thought you were going to get rejected again, but you didn't?
Um, well, yeah, there's been quite a few where I thought I'd get rejected and was like very happily surprised. Not I don't think there's been any like super recently. I think the sort of biggest ones were one of the big goals I had with it was to get a sponsor for the podcast. And so I listed like my dream sponsors. And at the top of that list was Flowdesk because I was already an affiliate for them. I used their platform loads and I really loved it. And then like about it was really early days of the challenge. They sent me an email about something new that they were launching. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to reply and ask them if they want to sponsor the podcast. Because I think they'd said that I was in their like top 100 affiliates or something. And I was like, oh, that sounds quite good. And so
Mm,
I was kind of a bit like, since I'm one of your top 100 affiliates, would you be up for sponsoring the podcast? Thinking that, like absolutely not. And then they went away and like researched the podcast and came back and was like, yeah, we think it would be a perfect fit. And so I was like, oh, I thought the sponsorship was going to be how I was going to rack up all of my rejections. And then my dream sponsor said yes straight away. So I was a bit like taken aback by that. So that was one of the biggest ones for me. And then the other one was I actually pitched to be on Chris Doe's podcast. So about a year after I'd done the challenge, I was like, right, I'm going to pitch it to him, and
brilliant.
tell him the story about how he sparked this whole thing off. And I didn't hear back for ages, so I was like, oh, it's not going to happen. And then I think I pitched in the August, and then I think I heard back from him in maybe like November or December. And he was like, yeah, I love it. Let's do it. Like, come on the podcast. So then we recorded
Brilliant.
a podcast episode. And the thing that's so hilarious about it to me is like so when he pitched to be on mine, I think my podcast was like averaging like 1,000 downloads per
That's
episode.
great.
His podcast gets 20,000 downloads per episode. And
Gosh.
he's also has 2.5 million subscribers on YouTube, which it was going to go on as well. And so I was like, this is a much better scenario for me. Like, this is so much more beneficial to me than it would have been to have him on my podcast. So I was like, this is incredible. So, yes, I did that. So I went on his podcast, which was kind of scary because I
That
did. If
was
you
going to
don't,
be my next question. I
yeah.
mean, were you nervous? Gosh.
Well, I was nervous, but I actually could really feel a difference from a year before. So this happened a year after I started the challenge. And I actually didn't feel anywhere near as nervous as I thought I would. And I didn't feel as nervous I know I would have felt a year ago. And so that was a really nice sort of like confirmation of like the confidence that doing the rejection challenge had given me, that it didn't feel as scary. So yeah, I mean, I find him quite intimidating just in terms of like how he shows up online. Like he's very blunt and he tells you exactly what you think he thinks. Like his coaching style is very, like it's not softly, like let me gently guide you through this. He's very much like, this is what you need to do. Why aren't you doing it? And I also knew that he loves chatting about like the details and money and all this kind of stuff. So that I was quite nervous about. But actually, when we started chatting, like he's very friendly and he's very easy to chat to. And I think it helped that I had met him briefly in person. So like I did know sort of like what he was like in real life, if that makes sense. So yeah.
Yeah, and he's not everybody's cup of tea, is he?
No, to be honest, I'm not sure I could handle being coached by him. I'm definitely more of a like, I need someone to like say nice, encouraging things to me, like not tell me off. Whereas his style is more like quite blunt. Yeah. But I think for some people it works amazingly. Like I've got friends that are
Yeah,
in
yeah.
his coaching program and they love it. Like they love the tough love. And it works really well for them. I think,
It's great.
yeah.
We have choices, don't we? That's the great
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
We can all start our own thing, and some people will like it, some people will hate it. That's cool. You can decide to choose that over there, or you can choose that there. We've got some lovely comments happening in the
Yeah,
chat. We
really good.
live, Katie Chappell. Is it Chappell or Chapel?
Chapel, I think.
Chapel. God. See, this is the other thing I really struggle with podcasts. Sometimes I have to practice
People's
the
names. Yeah.
names.
Oh my
I'd be
goodness.
like under my breath, under my breath. Like that scene out of Anchorman
Yeah.
when he's like going, How now, brown cow?
Yeah.
How
But
now? I love Scotch.
but
Scotch, Scotch, Scotch.
do you ever get it though, where you say it too many times and then you totally get it in your head? Because I had a guest on my podcast, and his surname was like is well, it is. I keep saying was. His surname is Barnard.
Oh
That's like an
no.
easy name. But then I got really in my head about whether it was like
Bernard.
Barnard. Like where I got in my head about where to put the emphasis. And oh my goodness, I looked back at some messages. I basically voice noted him on Instagram, me saying his surname over and over again. And he was like, Liz, I just don't understand why you can't get it. It's really easy. And I'm just there going, Barnard, Barnard. And honestly, it was bad. But yeah.
Somebody in the comments, Sandrine, saying barnacle, she would have said. You know,
Barnacle, yes.
it's mad, isn't it? When you're under sort of pressure and
I
stress and you want to
know.
get it right, your brain just goes, "Ooh," comes
Yeah.
up with all these crazy things. Right, I'm just going to have a quick break because we're sort of almost halfway through the kind of interview, and then we're going to have a really nice Q&A little session where the audience can ask their questions to you via the chat. So if everybody watching this wants to think about what they'd like to ask Liz after this, by all means, add them to the chat now, and we'll go through them near the end. Okay, brilliant. So you went on Chris Dew's podcast with all the amazing bros.
Yeah, with all the bros. Yeah.
And obviously it must have been a really good boost for you marketing wise. You must have got lots of out of it, you know.
I think so, but probably less than you'd expect. And I think
Mm,
this is what it made me realize is that actually, like, knowing who your target audience is and who you're speaking to is actually really important. And like I get a lot of people, I don't know if you find this, Katie, but I get a lot of people who pitch to be on my podcast. And I'm like, you haven't researched who the audience is because this is not going to benefit you at all. Like it's not your audience. And
yeah.
going on Chris's podcast was a great experience. But actually, what I found happened was I just got loads of LinkedIn connection requests from men in America, and they're not my target audience. So in that sense, I don't think it led to like work or leads. Like I had really great chats off the back of it. And I think people really got a lot out of the episode because I think it was very different from what his usual guest is like. It was much more, I guess it was a bit more vulnerable, like here's this hard thing that I
It's
went
you.
through. Yeah, it's just me being me. And I think some people really like that because it was so different. So I got lots of really lovely messages from people, but yeah, lots of connection requests from like bro marketeers in America. Um,
with
so
the with
yeah,
the with the stylized LinkedIn header,
yes,
which
yeah,
I really want to do one, but I want to do it ironically and I want to make it really kind of like, I want to be folding my arms like that, going,
yes.
Katie Cowan. Can you just imagine?
I can imagine it. I can imagine it.
I am kind of a big deal.
Yeah, Sandrine said in the chat, exposure doesn't equate connections, and that's totally true. And I think that was actually a really good lesson for me. I mean, like I don't regret the experience at all because I think it like really helped me. It's sort of experience in like telling your story, and he's a good interviewer, and it was great to be a part of it. But yeah, I think often we look at people who get these opportunities and think, oh, that's it, like that must have led to all these incredible things. And often it doesn't. It's like the time that I went viral on TikTok and literally nothing happened. Like it had zero benefit to my business at
Why did
all.
you go viral on
Oh,
TikTok?
it was accidental. I shared a video of me making a pattern by hand and like cutting up the paper and moving the bits about around so people could understand like how a repeat pattern works. And I don't know what it was. I think because it's something that's complicated and that people struggle to understand. And I did a voiceover for it, and it was like the second video I'd posted on TikTok, and it went absolutely.
Hmm.
I think it had like 2.5 million views or something. But then what made me laugh a lot was there was so many comments being like, "Why are you doing this by hand? You could just do this in Illustrator." And I'm like, I know
Oh,
the whole point was like to show people, like in a way that was easier to understand than just clicking a button on Illustrator. But yeah,
that's
but
the
then
problem
that
with the internet. It's full
yeah,
of idiots.
I know. But then like that, that had zero, everyone's like wants to go viral, but that had zero benefit for my, it was fun at the time, but it had zero benefit for my business. So I think, yeah, I think that is, I think often we chase the things that look good or sound impressive, but they don't really like move your business forward in a sort of helpful way
Yeah,
necessarily.
no, I get it. So we've kind of covered why you got who rejected you. Chris, how could you?
Yeah.
Um, we've kind of talked about what you learned from it and how you reframed it and turned it around. Um, I think part of that reframing is also because it's not necessarily somebody turning you down because of you haven't got enough, listeners yet. It's more kind of like what happens when somebody doesn't reply or ghosts you, and what happens when you're not quite right the right person for a job, or if you didn't get that freelance job or all the rest of it. It's so easy to fall down that rabbit hole of saying I'm not good enough. This So many people are smashing it, I'm not. And it's with all the social media and all the things we're bombarded with, especially things like LinkedIn. My God, all those successful people on there writing incredible updates about how successful they're being. It can feel very overwhelming, and then you just think, oh, I'm so inadequate, I'm useless, I'm not going to amount to anything. But you have to flip it, don't you? And you have to think, actually, that person might just be busy, they might have just lost their mom, touch wood, hope they haven't. Anything could be happening in their other world. It's nothing to do with me, and I'm not that important, but I am valuable. And I think that's where I probably handle things when I get rejected.
Yeah, I think so. What was really interesting to me was the minute that I made the decision to do the rejection challenge, my mindset shifted immediately because I turned it into like a win-win situation for myself. Because I thought it was going to take me time to get used to that, but actually it happened straight away. But that, I think you're totally right. It's that like negativity bias, isn't it? Like what I realized about myself is that I immediately go extremely into the whole, they think I'm terrible, they think my work's bad, they don't like me as a person. I make it very personal. What's actually helped me the most with this is being a podcast host and having a lot of people pitch to be on my podcast. The reasons that I turn people down are rarely to do with them being terrible or a horrible person. It's
Exactly.
usually to do with, oh, I've just covered that topic with someone else, or
Hmm.
actually I've booked my schedule up and there isn't a slot. Like it's not actually about them, it's more about how I've like managed running the podcast. And so that actually really helped me to reframe it, like exactly like you said. Like there's so many other reasons behind the scenes as to why they might not have replied. I am terrible at replying to pitches. Sometimes it takes me months, and it's not because I don't want to. It's more because I just don't have the headspace to think about it at that time because I've got a bunch of other things going on and I want to sit down and like give a proper reply, and I just haven't had the time to work that out. So I think that really helped me, almost like being on the other side. Um, and I think the thing, you mentioned about how, like we look at what everybody else is doing and then we sort of think these negative thoughts about ourselves. I decided that I was going to try and share about it as much as possible. A, because content, but B, because I just think people don't talk about it that much. And everybody goes through it. And so for me, what I needed was this reminder that actually, even the people that I look up to, even people like Chris Do, um, he's getting rejected for things, but he's not necessarily talking about it, which is fine. That's like his decision. But actually, what I tried to do was start to think like this is just part of the creative process. Like this is part of being a creative. Everyone's experiencing it. And then once I accepted that, it was almost like I could be like, well, if I'm getting rejected, I'm on the right path. Like things are going as expected, like things are going right. I'm pushing myself. And so I actually started like to think, oh, this means I'm doing something right because I'm obviously like pushing myself. I'm like getting out there. I'm asking people for things that I want to do. And, people are saying no, and that's just part of the process. And so I think, but it's not like you're fixed, right? So it's not like, oh, I did this rejection challenge and now I never stress about rejection. I think what it is it's more like I can recover quicker because I now have these like new stories that I can tell myself. I can catch myself quicker when I feel myself going down there. Everyone thinks I'm terrible, everyone hates me. And then I've got these new stories that I can replace them with where I'm like, nope, this is normal. Everybody's experiencing it. This is part of the creative process. So yeah, I think that's been the big game changer for me.
It's your CBT tools. They're very
Mm.
helpful. And if anyone's watching this and thinking, yeah, probably need to work on that, just change the mindset. Have like little nuggets, one-liners that you can like put them on the wall above your desk. Like here, just say, the opposite of what your little brain starts thinking, because,
Mm.
it's the chimp brain, isn't it, at the front that
Yeah.
starts cracking out all these random ideas and thoughts. And we give it far too much attention. We need to let the rational brain kick in and say, okay, well, let's make sure that we have something ready the next time that silly thought pops up. It's
Mm.
definitely the case. I love the fact that you find the failing as progress, which is great. If you go to the gym and you want to build muscle, you have to do reps until you fail, until you reach
Until you
failure.
can't do another. Yeah.
It's the only way you're going to build muscle.
Hmm.
What a great analogy. I'm
That
amazing.
is a great analogy. Keep
Well,
all
it's
the
only because
gym
I'm going
bros
to,
happy.
yeah, yeah. If any bros are watching, there you go. We got that in for you. Bless. So we've kind of done half an hour of chatting. I think it's time we sort of took some questions, unless there's anything you want to share before we dive into what people and people watching. Drop your questions in the chat, please, and we'll dig them out.
I think there's one thing that I would want to share that I always try to
Mm.
say when I'm talking about this, which is just to like acknowledge my privilege of being able to do this. So I
Mm.
think like often being able to do something like this that feels challenging and feels a bit scary, you need to come from a place of safety. And so I think I have a support system that meant that this didn't feel as scary. So things like, I'm not a one income household. So if it impacted my income, there's like a buffer there. Or, like I have a supportive family who, if I got a really bad rejection and felt terrible about it, would, like give me a pep talk and give me a boost. And I think like everyone's got different circumstances. And while I think everyone can work on this mindset shift, I think we're all starting from different places. And I think like it's good, like people, there's a thing called rejection sensitivity disorder, where actually rejection is like a really big deal for people. And I don't think that means that they can't change things, but I think it's just good, like to be aware, just because this is something that worked really well for me, like you might be starting in a different place with it. And so it's okay if you don't, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't recommend that anyone goes for 100 rejections because that's not possible. But it might be that you start off with, like, I'm just going to go for one, this week and see what happens. Like you can make your own challenge that sort of suits you and your personality.
Yeah, you're diving into the subject there as well of comparison,
Mm,
and that kind of you're looking at somebody over there and comparing yourself to them and like, why aren't I where they are? But you've got to remember you're on your own path,
yeah.
and their path looks completely different to yours. They've it's like being in a kitchen and they're cooking up a recipe and you want to copy what they've made, which is a success and tastes great, but actually you've got to go through that process yourself. And when you
Mm,
take a step back and say, yeah, okay, I'm where I'm at, and if I can get to some version of that in future, great, but I'm just not going to focus on that over there. I'm going to focus on what I'm doing good right now, and
mm,
put the attention and focus in on how I can improve.
yeah.
Yeah, great. So we have a question in the comments. Liz from Kirsty Hepworth. What has been the most inspiring episode of your podcast that you've gone back to over and over again? Oh, or maybe she means of any podcast episode.
Any
I don't know, Kirsty.
podcast.
Can you
Mm.
clarify? When you need a creative boost.
I can tell you the one from my podcast, which is I recorded an episode with a coach called Sophie Cliff. And she is like she would call herself a joy coach. And in it, we talked about how um like shame is a real sort of killer of joy. And so we were talking, it was just very much like unpicking, like what are the things that stop us from experiencing joy in our lives. And I think, we talked about comparison just then. People always talk about how comparison is the thief of joy. Oh no, it wasn't shame, sorry. It was the word should. That was it. I knew it began with the letter S.
Mm.
So she was like, the word should is actually a killer of joy. And I definitely have experienced this a lot in my business where it's like, well, I should be doing this. Well, I should be
Mm.
doing this. And then yeah, that was a huge reframe for me. And I think about it. Yeah, I have quite a few episodes where someone says something and I think about it all the time. But so I've done 2 episodes with her now, and both of them like gave me such a boost and I go back to. So she's written a book out. She's written 2 books and I would definitely recommend them. So yeah, that's probably one of the most inspiring ones for me.
Okay, thank you very much. Kirsty meant, oh, what I meant was one standout episode from that your podcast that inspired you and gives you
Oh.
what for me? Oh, right. Gosh. This isn't
Oh.
this isn't about me, Kirsty. This is about Liz. So many. I mean, just like Liz says, there's so many nuggets that you take from the different episodes. I've met so many lovely people and stayed in touch. I think actually, not I know we were saying that Creative Boom is very much about a mix of established and emerging names, but I think my favorite chats have always been with Paula Scher, the graphic designer,
Oh, yeah.
because she is very humble, very down to earth. We always have a bit of a laugh before and after. And the last time I did a podcast with her, I think, when was it? A couple of years ago. She said to me at the end before I signed off, she went, Katie, Creative Boom, it's really, really good. Keep going. And it just really gave
What
me
a
such
boost.
a
Yeah.
boost because, I've been working on this for 15, 16 years. And Liz will tell all of you that running your own business, and I'm sure there's lots of you watching this who do as well, it takes it out of you. It's a lot of work. Right. So it's nice when Paula Scher says, keep going.
Yeah. I'd take that. I'd be so chuffed with that.
It was very, very humbling. I was going through a difficult patch at the time, so I actually tried to stop myself from crying on the
Crying,
phone with her.
yeah.
Right. Any perspective on setting your price value as a creative and staying confident in that value you're providing, in the value that you're providing, asks Tim.
Oh, that's a great question.
Mm.
I think there's a really helpful stat, and I can't remember the exact figures, but it was basically like if everyone's if your prospective clients are saying yes to your pricing, then it's not high enough. So actually, that brings back in the rejection thing that there should be a certain number of clients that are rejecting you. Um, and I think that actually has given me the confidence and the like emboldened me to increase my prices when I should, because like I don't need everybody to say yes to working with me. I just need actually quite a small number of people to say yes to working with me. And as long as I'm sort of attracting the right people and I am getting, that number of projects is actually fine if I'm too expensive for some people. I do think though that it has to be like a combination of things. I think there's like a lot of coaches whose answer to everything is like just raise your prices, and that really frustrates me because there's like no nuance in that.
It's a
And
bit risky as well,
yeah, it's a bit risky. And I particularly work with a group of people that don't have the biggest budgets, and I don't want to stop working with them. So I have basically structured my business so that I can make income in other areas. That means that I can still work with them like I do increase my prices, but I'm not charging, like what someone would charge if they were working with a corporate company. Do you know what I mean? Like for branding. So yeah, I think it has to still feel good to you. And I think it's this like balancing act of, are people willing to pay it? Do you feel good charging it? Because I think it's really hard to show up and sell something if you don't. And you can definitely challenge yourself on that. Like sometimes I have to be like, oh, actually, I need to like put it up a little bit. Like one of the things that I always forget to think about is like just raising my prices based on like inflation rate, right? Like rising the same way another business would. Um, so I have to like I try and check in like every sort of, 6 months or every year with that sort of thing. But yeah, so I think it's
Tough.
hard. It's a combination of things, and it's going to be very different depending on like who you're trying to sell to, like who you want to work with. But yeah, it does irk me when people are like, just raise your prices. Like
Just
that's
raise
this
your prices, just do
magic
it. I
fix
know.
all.
I know so many freelancers who are older than me who daren't raise their prices right now. That because there's so much competition. It's really tough.
Yeah, it is
So
hard.
Tim pre-texted this with one thing that I personally struggle with a lot is not getting rejected per se, but getting my prices rejected, which
Hmm.
rationally I know are in the range of average for the location and the quality of service, but emotionally my mind goes immediately to my work is not worth what I'm asking to be paid for it. Oh, it's such a dilemma, isn't it?
That is a dilemma. And I think what really helps is to think how you buy things. Like it might be
Mm.
that at that point in time it's not worth it to you. Like so for me, I always think about how actually there's loads of things I could invest in for my business, but I can't afford to do them all at the same time. So it's not that they're not worth it to me, it's that I have to pick one, focus on that, and then, and then down the line I can work on the other. So it would potentially be like, oh, yeah, like it's not actually to do with the fact that the thing's not worth it. It's just I don't have the capacity to pay for all of the things at once. So I think it's like remembering how you shop and how, well, like shop's a weird way to put it because it's not like you're just buying something in a shop, but
Nice.
like how you spend your money and how you decide, where to allocate that money. Like that really helps me sort of change my perspective on it.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so we have Macarena. Sorry if I've pronounced your name wrong. Let's say you're running a mailing campaign, can be any, and you're 100% dedicated to it. After months, you realize it's not working. Do you have a specific time frame or signal that tells you it's time to change your strategy, or is there a definitive point where, after so many no's, you know it's time to move on to a different approach?
When you say a mailing campaign, do you mean like following, like you've pitched for something and then you're following up? Because that I have thoughts. So I think one of the biggest lessons, well, I'll go into this and then if you clarify it's something different, then we can answer that. But I definitely think that one of the things that people don't do enough is follow up a pitch. And I think the thing that really convinced me that this is worthwhile doing again is my experience of being on the other side. So sometimes someone would send me a pitch and then I'd get another like 10 emails in and it would go down the page and I'd get distracted and I'd forget to reply. And it wasn't that I didn't want them to be on the podcast, it was that I just didn't reply straight away. And so I was actually really grateful for their follow-up email because I was like, oh yeah, I totally wanted to have that person on. And
Yeah.
then that would nudge me and I'd reply and be like, yes, oh, I'm so sorry I didn't reply. Yeah, I do want you to come on the podcast. So I am a big believer in sending a follow-up. I think if specifically, well, maybe this is a huge generalization, but I think in the UK specifically, as people who are British, this is something that we really struggle with. Like, we don't want to bother people, we don't want to harass them. But honestly, based on how people manage their inbox, I mean, my inbox is chaos. So, like, actually, I appreciate a follow-up. I would say, though, I would give it a limit. So in my head, I feel comfortable following up twice. After that, I feel like to me that feels too many. But you have to decide what's right to you because for some people, maybe they need that many follow-ups. For other people, maybe that starts to get annoying. For me, if people start emailing me like every couple of days and we're on like email five, I'm like, can you just get the point? Like I don't like so yeah, I would say follow up a couple of times. But just do it in a really nice, chilled way. Like don't get aggressive. I've had some people that get really aggressive, or like try and be really smart. Like I've had some hilarious emails where this guy's like, um, oh, well, you obviously think I'm like, I think he was like, oh, you obviously think I'm a dick because, like you didn't reply. And I was like, no, that's not it. But now I do because you're like harassing me. So, yeah, I don't know. It's hard. But the
It's
thing that's hard about it is I can tell you what I like as a podcast
yeah.
host, but everyone's different, right? So some people appreciate a more aggressive approach and some people don't. So,
It's disappointing and comforting, if that makes sense. No, I'm not the only one who gets certain emails like that.
yeah.
I get some very strange emails in my inbox. Okay, do you have any tips on how to approach people about being on their podcast or asking them to be on yours? Asks Denise. Good
I've
question.
got so many tips. So I saw another question that links in with this, which was basically about, I think it was about, do you think you have to have a connection with someone before you pitch to be on them. And I personally think that that's a really good plan, because if I get a pitch from someone where I recognize their name, so it doesn't have to be that I've like connected with them, but maybe they've like interacted with me on Instagram or sent me a DM. I'm like, oh, that name looks familiar. I'm much more likely to go and check it out than if it's like someone that I've never heard of before. So I do think that that's a really good, almost like not in a horrible, sleazy, strategic way, but just do a bit of like warm up, do a bit of like interacting with that person online. The thing that drives me absolutely crazy is when people pitch to me and they're like, I love what you're doing. I love your podcast. And then I go and check them out and they don't even follow me on Instagram. So I'm like, well, you obviously don't love it
Not giving us
like
enough
that
love.
much. Yeah. And I like, not that I feel like everyone has to follow me on Instagram, but I'm kind of like, I feel like that's the least you should do. Like
Yeah.
if you want someone's audience, right, go and be an active member and like in their audience.
You know it's a copy and paste job, right? They've just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
thrown out an email to 20 different people, changed the name at the top, and it's a
Exactly.
blanket email, and it's just, yeah,
Yeah.
doesn't make
And
you feel very loved.
that is off-putting. So I would do that like warm up, kind of bit. I would definitely. So what I've actually like worked out the structure that I really like for a pitch. So what I think you go in with a very short introduction, not loads, but like enough to give me a general idea of who you are and what you're about. I always like it when people suggest to me ideas for what we could chat about. So maybe like 3 ideas of what the podcast could be about. And it needs to be really specific. So if you pitch to me and you say, I want to talk about branding, that is just too vague. I'm like, what about branding? Whereas if you're like, oh, like I had a pitch recently that was so good and it was all about Sonic branding, and that was like a topic I hadn't covered, and I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, I want to talk about Sonic branding. So like give me like a really specific topic that you want to talk about. And then the other thing that I think is really important that so many people don't do is I want links to everything, because I don't want to have to go and Google you. So like give me a link to your social media, give me a link to your website, and give me a link to other podcasts you've been on if you have been a guest on podcasts. And if you haven't, then send me a link to like a video where I can hear you talking, because for me, like I need to know, I can get a good sense from that whether I think we'll have a good rapport, like whether I'll be able to like interview you, like whether it'll flow, all this kind of thing. So those would be my main tips. Basically, make it as easy as possible for the podcast host to say yes to you. Like, don't make them do any additional work.
Exactly. It's kind of making sure there's no obstacles in the path, doing a very clear pitch email saying, this is why I think it would be great to be on your show. And also, like, look back and research the different themes that have been talked about
Mm-hmm.
lately. Because if you're pitching to talk about, I don't know, rejection, and just last month you had somebody else talking about that, then it's unlikely to get
Yeah.
accepted. You've got to think of something fresh, something maybe that's currently relevant, and all the rest of it. Um,
I also love a bit of sucking up. So if you tell me a podcast episode of mine that you enjoyed, then that shows me that you've done a bit of research and that you've listened to my podcast. Do you know what I mean? Because I think
yeah,
loads of people, like you said, just do the copy and paste blanket and they've never listened to the podcast. This is why I get so many pitches where I'm like, are you sure? Because this is going to be a waste of your time.
I know, I know.
Um, so yeah, just like pick an episode and be like, oh, I really like this episode because of this. And I think that goes a long way as well.
Yeah, I think so. It's nice to warm up to people, and it's if you are going to sort of like pitch to Liz, follow her on a certain on any of the social networks, give her a shout out, send her a nice email. We're all
Yeah.
human at the end of the day, and kindness will get you everywhere. Okay, so my mindset has been, said Sandrine, so far to pitch and then completely forget about it the minute I hit send. But now I feel like I'm burying my head in the sand. I feel like maybe if I get a rejection, I could as well ask
Ooh,
for
ask for
feedback while
feedback.
I'm at it. How do you feel about asking for that feedback at the rejection stage? It's an interesting one.
That is an interesting one. Like, so hilariously, as someone who is going out seeking rejection, I find it really stressful rejecting other people. And so, like, I often
Yeah.
feel really bad about it. But I think I would totally respect that. If someone was like, would you mind giving me some feedback as to why And yeah, I would totally respect that. And I would probably, go back to you and be like, well, like, to be honest, the feedback is usually I've scheduled guests until like October. And so I just can't think about any more like right now. So pitch again in like December, or something. It would probably be something like that. But yeah, I think that's a smart idea because like if it is something about your pitch, so I actually gave someone some unsolicited feedback recently where I got a pitch from this guy who had a podcast and he was like, check out my podcast. And I often do like just if they've put a link in, I will click on it and go and see. And I already kind of knew that he wasn't the right fit for mine. But I went to his podcast and it was all men on it, even though it was there was no reason why it should be. I knew that there was like plenty
Okay.
of women who could speak about that topic. And so I replied to him and I was like, I hope you don't mind. Like, this isn't the right fit for me, but I hope you don't mind some unsolicited
Very brave.
advice. I know it was brave. I was like, I actually found it quite off-putting that there was no women on your podcast. Like, have you considered interviewing any women? And I was like, oh no, what am I going to get back? But he actually sent me such a good response. And he was like, thank you so much, Liz. Like, I really appreciate that feedback. It is something that I'm working on. And I've asked, a whole bunch of women to be on the podcast. So it actually turned out to be a really good, wholesome exchange.
Great.
But like that's really helpful for people. Like if you're doing something and other people are finding it really off-putting, like it might be something that you've done really accidentally or subconsciously. And it's
Yeah.
hard to hear that feedback, but if you go into it with that mindset shift of actually this is helping me get better and this is helping me grow, like
Mm.
that's a really good place for you to be, I think.
Very healthy. I think all of us could do with some feedback. I would love it. And I had a good excuse, didn't I, for turning you down the first time you asked me to be on your podcast, which I was really surprised about and very, very humbled. But yeah, do you want to
Yeah.
tell me? When did you first get in touch with me? Was it September?
Yeah, it was at the end of
Yeah,
last. Yeah, well, I think you had a lot going on and you weren't very well. And so I think you said
really.
yes and then you were like, actually, can we postpone it? And I was like, yeah, that's totally fine.
I felt so bad, but
Oh
it was like
no.
literally a matter of life and death. I was on the floor and in so much pain, and
Yeah.
I was just very grateful to be given a second chance. Um,
Oh, absolutely. And to be honest, like that sort of thing is totally, well, because of the way that I do my podcast, like if someone's like, oh, can we just do it in a couple of months? I'm like, yeah, great. Like that's totally fine. Like just, well, I was just really chuffed that you'd said yes at all. So,
well, I'm chuffed. I'm likewise, it's really tough, isn't it? Because like there's so many opportunities out there and only so many slots for people to go in. We
Mm,
we share 4 or 5 articles from Monday to Thursday on Creative Boom. We have 12 episodes per season on the podcast. That there's not space for everyone, which
yeah.
really, really frustrates me because it goes against why I started this in the first place. So it's really interesting to hear that you struggle with that as well. But it usually is the case. We just don't have enough room really for everyone.
Yeah.
So we try and help people out in other ways. Has anybody else got any more questions before we wrap this up? This is your last chance. I mean, Liz, you've been absolutely fantastic.
Oh, thanks.
I've
Thanks for
really
having me. This has
enjoyed
been
chatting with you
fun.
about getting rejected. Oh, Eileen, thank you, Eileen. Is doing podcasts a necessary part of marketing?
I don't think so. I think there's so many facets of marketing. Like I think you need to find what you enjoy. I do think that going on podcast is a brilliant way of marketing
Yes.
yourself because it's really intimate. So like people are often listening to podcasts like while they're just doing things in their home or going for a walk and you're in their ears and they feel like they're part of the conversation. So it's like it's very intimate. It means that people can really get to know you and you're basically getting yourself in front of a whole new audience. So if it's something that you like and enjoy, I would say go for it. It's a brilliant way of marketing yourself. If
Mm.
you hate it and the thought of it is appalling to you, I would say find something else, like find a different way to market yourself. Like maybe writing's your thing. So just like go
Mm.
all in on email marketing. I think there's so many different things that you can do and you can't really do all of them. Like I love podcasting. So for me, it makes sense as like pitching to be on other people's podcasts makes sense. So I would say no, it's not necessary, but I think it is a good way.
I think that's great. listening to creative podcasts is my way to pretend to be with colleagues while I'm working at home alone. You rule my
Mm,
personal agency. Isn't that lovely,
you're
Sandrine?
so nice. Yeah.
Um, how has your podcast helped your business? If so, how? Asks Denise.
Oh my goodness, like massively. I think it's one of the best things that I've done for my business. I think something that's hard is that it is really hard to measure it in a very tangible way. But a few that spring to mind. So for me, I do a lot of work now with Adobe, and the way they found me was because I put out a call for sponsors for the podcast. And I didn't know
Wow.
this, but a guy from the marketing team in the UK was following me. And he replied and was like, yes, send over the information. And they didn't end up sponsoring the podcast then, but he recommended me for this ambassador program. And I've basically been working with them now for 3 years. And it's led to like absolutely crazy things. Like yesterday, I was doing a talk at an event. Like I've done loads of public speaking, created lots of content. It's just given me opportunities that I wouldn't have had. And I do credit the podcast for that because it was for me, but it was just from me putting up a story on a whim, being like, oh, I'm looking for sponsors, let me know if anyone's interested. You never know who's watching. You never know who like follows you from a personal account. So that's one way. The other way that I never even considered when I started it, but it's like grown my network. Like even just the fact that I'm having this chat with Katie now was because we had a chat on my podcast and now we got on really
Yeah.
well and
Yeah.
like we had a great time. And so I think like it often leads to other things, like you've had someone on your podcast, you click with them, you stay in touch with them. So I feel like there's all these different people now that I'm still connected to and in touch with, and like if an opportunity comes up I can recommend them or they might think of me for something. So in that sense it's been massive, and it's just given me an opportunity for people to get to know me better, to like understand what I'm about and what I do. So it's like it does sort of promote my business. One thing that someone did say to me recently, which I think is interesting, is because I do mostly interviews, I'm usually platforming other people and their expertise, and I don't have much of an opportunity to share my expertise. Like I do obviously like chip in when I'm chatting to people, but often I'm asking questions that I maybe already know the answer to, but I'm asking the questions that I think people will want to hear. And so
Hmm.
I considering doing a series in the summer. Like so last year I did it, and I think I'm going to do it a bit longer again of solo episodes. So actually I can share some of my expertise. But I think it always comes
Great
back
idea.
to, yeah, yeah, exactly. Change it up a bit. I think it always comes back to like what your goals are for it.
Hmm.
So, if it's growing your network, oh my goodness, like interviews is the way to go.
Yeah.
If it's very much like you want it to be a lead generator for clients, like maybe solo episodes, predominantly would be more effective. So I think, yeah, but it's been huge for my business. It's like a huge investment. Like it hasn't really made me money in the sense that of like, like the
Directly.
sponsor, yeah, directly. I think that's it. Like I think it has made me money, but it's hard to quantify that because often if I get a client, they'll be like, oh, well, I followed you on Instagram. Oh, and I listened to your podcast. Like it's part of a bigger ecosystem of ways that they found me. So yeah, it's hard to sort of pin it exactly to that.
Yeah, and if you're a bit shy of doing a podcast on your own, start one with friends. That's what Katie
Mm,
did with the Good Ship
yeah,
illustration podcast, which is fab. She's done that with two
so
friends
good.
that she meets up with on a regular basis to co-work with and brainstorm. And if you're not into speaking, public speaking, I mean, there's loads of other things you can do. You can blog, you can start a newsletter, you can contribute to articles on Creative Boom or all the other kind of major magazines. Um, See, I just can't do it. Anyway, Liz, this has been so good. I hope you, the audience, have found this really helpful and valuable. Thank you so much for your time, Liz.
Oh, thanks for having me. I've loved it.
It's been great. And if you're all wanting more kind of advice and valuable insights on how to market yourself, then we've got a great free workshop coming up with Claire Blythe on the 6th of March at 12 p.m. again, similar format, thinking bigger with PR and how to build your reputation beyond social media. So until then, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.